we wanted to make it really easy for developers to switch back and forth these different feature flags, create companies, create users on their own development environment, which is something that they didn't have before in the local development environment. And now they do. So they just run a simple command and they get all this data that they need.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 152, an internal developer platform story. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. It's not a big surprise, but Victor always gives me a hard time about using my machines. I have two machines. I have a now 11-year-old MacBook Air with 4 gig of RAM, and I have a 2015 MacBook Pro with 16 gig of RAM. And he keeps saying, why don't you get a newer machine? And I say, well, I'm just too cheap.
To be more precise, I'm saying, why don't you get a new, better machine or stop working locally completely? That's really the problem. You can do almost everything remotely, but you're not doing either, right? It's similar like, hey, you need a virtual machine. You can run it locally. You can run it remotely in AWS, but you need to choose what you do. And when you choose, then you need to have hardware for that.
And this isn't a very strange problem that many people see. And today we have on something a little different. It's sort of a case study. We have Diogo and Ragnar on. Guys, how are you doing today?
I am very well and happy to be here.
Hello, everybody. I'm fine as well. Thanks.
And we brought these guys on today to talk about this remote development idea and how they're solving it within their company. So, guys, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves a little bit more, and then we'll come back and talk about, what the problem was.
Sure. All right. So my name is Diogo, and I'm currently the Developer Experience Project Manager at Pipedrive. I've been working at Pipedrive for 5 years now, both at times as the manager, others as an individual contributor. And since the role of Developer Experience was created last year, I've been driving several initiatives within Pipedrive to make sure that developers here basically feel great about their day-to-day work and have more consistent opportunities to, being in a state of flow.
Yeah, hello, my name is Ragnar and I am also working at Pipedrive. I joined Pipedrive 2019 in autumn. I'm working at Pipedrive as a senior DevOps engineer at the moment, and my primary responsibility is to work on automation and CI/CD, and from development environment to production.
And we want to also go ahead and give a hat tip to one of our DevOps Toolkit people that live in our Slack workspace over there. If you don't know about that, go over to the show notes. You'll see a link off to there. And it's to Stefan. He got all this set up. Now, Pipedrive is not a developer tool company, right? You're a sales lead company. So there's nothing to sell here today unless you're looking to figure out how to get sales leads and stuff. But that's not what we're talking about. We'll let the sales guys do sales guys things. We're going to talk about the dev side of things. So what was the real problem? Was the problem I was setting up at the very beginning sort of the problem that you were running into? You got underpowered machines and people just in a world to where you were just using VS Code and everything ran locally wasn't a big deal, but all of a sudden microservices, Kubernetes, all the other stuff started showing up. Was that the problem that started to raise its head?
Yes, and it's not recent. So I can tell you that the local development environment has been, the number one complaint developers at Pipedrive have had for the past few years here. And that despite considerable investment that the company has made around the local development environment throughout the years, really, both, using different off-the-shelf solutions or lastly, homebrewed solutions. The fact is that we were never able to really make it work consistently during, considerable period of time. to make it as stable and as performant as developers wanted and needed it to be on a consistent basis. After all this time, we really come to the realization that the issues that we were fighting could not be fixed in the local development environment. Too many different, non-reproducible environments, the operating system that they're using, the dependencies that they have installed locally on their computer, just made it very complex for the team that's responsible for the development environment to actually, fix the issues that detect and fix the issues that people are having and to reproduce them. And also because the many services that we have at Pipedrive are starting to not be feasibly runnable within the constraints of a single developer computer. Besides having, other applications running in the same computer, competing for the same resources. So yeah, this was the trigger point that made us decide to move to a cloud-based development environment.
So how does that environment look like? Or let's start with the question first. Was it build or buy? Meaning that did you build it from scratch by yourself? Did you pick up the tools that already exist? How did you do it?
Yeah, well, we didn't buy anything. We just built it ourselves from scratch by using some of the projects that were available like for free, in open source community. It all started, at least like developing on Kubernetes directly, it all started in spring 2020. So that's the time when we started with the development of a local development environment or the tooling for that. And then we also, as part of that project, did a tiny proof of concept on remote development environment. But the goal was to deliver the local development environment first. Then we saw that there is a tool available on the market for free, which is called DevSpace. And we experimented with it a bit, but it got left in the background initially, and we focused on the local development environment only. But once we released local development environment, we quite soon realized that we had too many problems with it. And later, some developers actually picked up the proof of concept for a remote development environment and started to look into it. And last year in August, or in September, I think, we actually decided to invest heavily in a remote development environment as well and put all our bets on it and built a tool which integrates with DevSpace, and that this tool allows us now to develop directly on remote Kubernetes clusters. Your project code being on your workstation, but the service itself is running on remote cluster. And all the changes that you make on your workstation to the code get immediately synced to the remote containers running on Kubernetes clusters. This is how it started, and this is where we are at the moment today.
And what's the reaction from people? Love it, hate it? How likable you are right now in a company?
Very likable. To be honest, we weren't expecting it to grow this fast. So we made a general release about nearly 2 months now. And we need to scale the remote environment to be able to cope with the number of machines that we need to run, to have 200, 300 developers working there. And the pace of adoption has actually exceeded our estimates. So we need to tell people, hey, wait a bit. Next week, we're going to have more capacity available and you can onboard into this new environment. But the feedback has been great. But the thing is, we didn't just focus on, enabling to run these containers on a remote environment. We actually added more things to the CLI tool that we built. So Pipedrive is very complex. The features behave differently depending, on the tier that you are, on the feature flags, on extras that you're paying. And we wanted to make it really easy for developers to switch back and forth these different feature flags, create companies, create users on their own development environment, which is something that they didn't have before in the local development environment. And now they do. So they just run a simple command and they get all this data that they need. Additionally, we provide the ability for them to write their own playbooks that they can share within their own teams to execute, different things that they want to set up just the environment with the right kind of data that they need to develop. So it's not just about moving things to remote development environment, but also extending it with further functionality that they did not have before. So that's also why the adoption is growing this fast.
So that's mostly based on DevSpace, if I understood right.
Yes.
What are those additions that you created? One example, just out of curiosity. on top of DevSpace, right?
We actually wrote a new CLI tool, and that we execute DevSpace as a library underneath it. Right. And so what we did is we extended it with additional commands. So you developers don't interact with DevSpace commands. They interact with our own CLI tool commands. So in a sense, they can just go to the folder of one microservice that they're working in. They just execute one command and boom, they get the environment, they get everything deployed there, users, all of that stuff with a single command. So it's not raw DevSpace. We actually use DevSpace underneath, but we made it much more convenient to developers.
Yeah, we only use a subset of DevSpace in our own CLI tool. So if I remember correctly, then the commands that we use from DevSpace are dev, purge, and also enter. I think that's basically it. So we don't use the full feature set of DevSpace in our own tool. So just a subset of it.
But it works great. DevSpace is great.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is.
So how often do people forget to execute whatever is the replacement for DevSpace purge?
They don't execute purge. So that's another thing. Our environment, basically, we detect after, let's say, 1 hour and a half if it's idle, and we just scale down the entire environment, right? And when developers try to use it again, let's say they try to run the command again, which is devbox service develop, or they go to the UI, they open the browser and go to it, it automatically resumes. And after 3 minutes and a half, the environment is back up and running with everything that they had before. So as we move to this cloud-based environment, we also had quite a bit of concern how we're going to manage costs. And so basically, it's elastic, right? We just adapt as needed.
Did you do similar things, I guess, also outside of local CLIs? I'm guessing that you're using something very similar when creating a pull request and things like that, right?
Not sure I understood the question here.
So you have the capability for me as a developer in your company to execute some command. I get my application deployed in a Kubernetes cluster running somewhere, so that I can code. My code is synchronized with that. I can run local tests and so on and so forth.
Yes.
Now I'm guessing that you are reusing those things in whichever automation you have in your company. Like you're probably running some pipelines, whichever tool you're using for pipelines. Whenever somebody creates a pull request, you're running you're deploying the same application.
We do the same thing for functional tests, for example. So we use the same kind of environment as part of the CI/CD pipeline. After build, we spin up one of these environments to run in functional tests. We execute them, or integration tests, depends on the complexity of the microservice in question. And yes, we do use this environment not only for development, but also for functional testing and actual testing by product managers and designers if they want.
Yeah, but later in the CI/CD pipeline, we don't use that tool yet. I mean, this is meant for development environment only at the moment. But if you talk about CI/CD pipelines, then this tool isn't integrated there yet. So
not the CLI, but the system, the underlying system for the Kubernetes cluster, we definitely use.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
At this point, you're based in Estonia. Pipedrive is actually all over the world. With the pandemic that's been going on, what kind of network issues? Because I'm assuming not everybody is back in an office yet. What was that process like?
Well, I can tell you that in Lisbon, at least no one is back in office, which is where I'm based in Portugal. We have people in Prague as well and other places. So network hasn't been an issue at the moment. At least we haven't had any kind of feedback that network was an issue.
So I'm assuming to actually get into this with revealing anything, people get on a VPN, they run the CLI, and life goes on.
Yes. But at the end of the day, even the local-based environment wasn't fully local in Pipedrive. So there was some shared components that are across all developers. So they already had to be connected to the VPN to work anyway with the local development environment.
Did you encounter issues or missing things that are from DevSpace itself? And did you get involved with DevSpace community outside of using it only?
Yes, we did. I, for example, contacted DevSpace people, and Lukas is their CEO. So DevSpace is owned by Loft Labs Inc., and the CEO of that company is Lukas Gentile, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he was actually very happy that we are using their product in our stack. And he would like to actually gather some feedback from us. And we will express our feelings about DevSpace. We will most probably make some proposals, what to do differently, what to do better. And let's see how it goes. So yeah, we have actually contacted them.
To be honest, the only thing that we found that in terms of experience for the users could be better, it's just in terms of the logging before the service starts. Because sometimes the service crashes and the logs are not shown immediately to developers, so they have to go to the Kubernetes interface and actually see the container logs to see what happened. But it's really small things. Other than that, I think DevSpace is really a great tool.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes it tells you something. I mean, if you execute a command on our own CLI tool and you get some sort of error situation, then the response comes from DevSpace library itself. Then it contains some words about DevSpace, and people start to ask questions. What is that? What should I do now? But well, yeah, it is what it is at the moment. But yeah, sometimes DevSpace library itself says something very specific about DevSpace.
The issue here is that we're using DevSpace as a library, right?
As a library. Yeah.
The reason why I'm asking that is more that I'm curious because different companies approach those things differently. Some tend to use other open source projects as a untouchable read-only library. It is what it is. Some are actually starting to take more control. Hey, this is not working as I want it to work. I'm going to make a pull request and improve it. So I'm trying to establish in which kind of group are you? Is for you DevSpace a read-only thing, or you are actively trying to steer it the way to do things that you need it to do?
So we're not using the full suite of capabilities that DevSpace has, right? So we're using a small subset. But for sure, you can count on us to open PRs if you find something that could be fixed. And I think Ragnar already opened one, at least, with one issue that we found.
Yeah. I have done 1 or 2 pull requests to DevSpace, but nothing very, very big so far. But we are totally open to actually contribute there as well, I think. So whatever makes our developers' lives easier, we should actually go for it.
You mentioned that one of the motivations for moving to remote dev environment are the physical constraints, like our system cannot run locally, right? I don't know whether that's memory or CPU or something like that. Did you think about making microservices more microservices, meaning more independent and more autonomous in a way? Or let's put it, more microservices?
So they are independent, right? But it depends on the kind of a developer that we're talking. So I can tell you that we have developers here that just develop against unit and functional tests in their microservice. So they mock all the dependencies and they just simulate the responses, and that's the way that they work. But we have other developers, maybe more junior or mid, that require it and have the feeling of the things actually talking end to end. Or front-end developers, right? You might have front-end developers, and for them to actually properly work, they need to see the whole thing integrated into the UI, right? Because we also have micro front-ends here. At the end of the day, it's not up to us, the team that supports the development environment, to say what's the architecture that the company needs to follow or that the teams needs to follow. We just need to make sure that the environment that we provide actually serves what they need. But again, it's not just an issue of limited resources. It's also an issue of reproducibility. So we have people reporting issues, right, in local development environment, but then we are supporting this thing and we're not able to reproduce it locally because they are running different versions of Docker for Mac. They're running Linux instead of Mac and other libraries that they're running in there, right? And so we don't control that ecosystem. So ideally, what we want is to start treating the dev environment as cattle instead of the current pets that they are or they were before, right? And to actually have a very high level of observability, because right now we didn't know what was happening in developers' computers. We didn't know how many resources they had available, how many errors they had, and now we have perfect visibility. We can see everything, right? And that allows us basically have alerts that we can immediately take action if we see something failing on the environment, and make sure that, we don't have to wait 3 or 4 hours until someone complains in a public channel, but we get right in top of it in a few minutes as soon as it happens.
So how does that look like? What's happening in the background after I execute whatever the command is, kind of start working, right? What happens there?
Yeah, the command we are talking about, or the tool, or the name for the tool is DevBox. And you start your development session with the command DevBox service develop. But before you run that command, you need to go to the directory where your microservice is, which is basically the repository root for the microservice. And after you run DevBox service develop, a set of pre-flight checks will be run, which basically check all the preconditions that need to be present or need to match in order to actually start your development environment, in order to connect to the remote Kubernetes cluster. All that kind of stuff is going on before you enter into the development mode. And once all the pre-flight checks are done, then a development image is built for the service locally, and this is pushed to Docker Hub. And once this is done, then the CLI will execute helm install command, and we install your service, your microservice, with Helm on the remote Kubernetes cluster with the development image that you just pushed out to Docker Hub. And once that is done, then the CLI will wait for successful deployment via Helm. And then all the port forwarding and file synchronization will be set up, and in the end you will see on your screen your microservice logs as well, which basically tell you that your microservice started, you're ready to go now. This is how it looks like.
And I'm guessing, is that service when it depends on other services? Is it deploying everything it depends on as well, or that's connecting to dependencies running in staging or something like that?
The CLI will do that in the future. So that's in the scope. That's not happening at the moment. So what we ask is for developers, developers know that they just execute a different command, which is devbox stack deploy. And they just select the stack that they want to deploy. So a stack is just a number of services that make up a certain feature, right? And so if they're developing a service A that belongs to stack B, they just, before running devbox service develop, they just run devbox stack deploy A there. But in the future, we have that plan so that they just go to the service. It actually detects if the environment already has the required stack running, and if it doesn't, it will deploy that before starting. That's the plan. But yes, that will happen.
Just to clarify one thing here. So when you actually start developing your service via devbox service develop command, then your service is deployed in a namespace where some set of dependencies are already present. So we sort of run Pipedrive application in isolation in namespaces on Kubernetes, and there is some sort of base set of services that already run there, and that allows us to very quickly to navigate to Pipedrive application inside that namespace and do some very basic things there. But if your service requires more dependencies than there are present in the namespace, then you need to deploy them at the moment separately. Yeah, but as Diogo explained you, we will automate that away as well.
That's the beginning of the story. What happens next? I've develop. I've finished developing a feature, let's say. What do I do next?
Well, you just open a PR on GitHub. You ask for reviews. Someone gives you an approval, let's say. And all, GitHub actions that we have in the workflows are passing. And you just add a simple label on GitHub, which is ready for deploy, and magic happens. So when you add that, basically the CI/CD kicks in, and your service is going to get deployed to production to all our different data centers. As a reference, we make, on average, I think it's over 100 deployments per day, if I'm not mistaken. And we're constantly delivering these PRs to production as soon as they're ready.
Yes, we have our deployments fully automated. We do continuous delivery here, or continuous deployments.
So basically, essentially, you are in a way making developers autonomous right? They're basically, are they in the full control of the process? Who decides to deploy to production?
The developers.
Nice.
They are also responsible for on-calls, so it's up to them, right? So we are organized in different teams, and the teams basically own the entire service. They decide if they want to deploy during the weekends. It's up to them, really. No one is controlling them. They're responsible for the SLAs of their services, so it's really up to them. But again, because what we provide really gives a number of guarantees. So in terms of what we require, in terms of coverage, in terms of quality, all the tooling that we have wired up for this, developers are not afraid to deploy to production, and they do so often, very many times per day.
Yeah, it's as simple as adding a Git label on your pull request.
Yes,
and magic will happen. Of course, it also means that all the gates need to pass before you add that label. Gates being here, all the quality checks. I don't know, some checks for standards that we have agreed on here in Pipedrive. And if all those checks are green, then you can basically go ahead and just add one label on your pull request, and that event will be picked up by the deployment engine in Pipedrive, and your service will get to production very soon.
I like it a lot, especially because I've been very vocal about the need for operations, and I'm using now word operations very broadly to say whomever is not developing end user applications, that their role should be only and exclusively to provide services and make developers autonomous. And that seems to be the direction you're taking, right? Nobody's opening Jira tickets to say, I need this deployed to production or something like that, right?
No, they deploy it. The only place where they ask for that is whenever there has to be big database schema changes, in which case it needs to be someone from infra operations to execute that, because you might have a database with millions and millions of rows, and it might take some time. So we place those large schema changes on the hands of infra.
But now it's curious what you just said, that they request. So are you saying that developers say, okay, I need help with this, or that
the developers just write what the migration looks like, and they just ask infra to run it. That's it.
Yeah.
Is the plan to eventually make that part of your pipe as well, to where the data change would be a gate, I guess, before you could do the next thing?
It depends. Not all services and databases require that. Some of them automatically run migrations by themselves when the data, that database is not too large. But when it grows to a very, very considerable size, then yes, the teams ask, and that's the point. They ask for infra to run it, right? It's not like they are enforced. They feel the need to ask infra to run it to make sure that it goes okay.
Yeah, otherwise, if it would be part of migration, then the migration could run very long time, and your service startup will suffer from that. So they kind of try to prevent that and ask infra to do that. And then if they go and develop and deploy their service, it goes really fast already.
Have you considered, and this is me not knowing DevSpace, have you considered moving to something like Gitpod for a remote IDE for the developers too? Because it sounds like it really picks up from the CLI of okay, go ahead and deploy my code, sync it over and do the thing. Are you trying to move it a little bit more left as well?
Not yet. And I can tell you why. So I already felt, because I was the person who drove this initiative 6 months ago, that I didn't think that developers were ready to accept to work in a fully remote environment. So I was already feeling that it could be a big ask for some to already have containers run remotely, for some of them, to force them to use, I don't know, some Visual Studio Code on a browser or something like that. I felt that could be too much to ask of them, because I know how, they like to have their Z shell profile and IDE configured to their taste. So I don't think we need to enforce that, nor I did feel that people were ready to move into that. But yeah, might be the reality in 2-3 years, let's see. But I don't think we're in that place right now for the vast majority of them.
What's next? What are you doing this year?
Well, right now we're developing the playbook solution. So we're wrapping up the the mission, as we call it here, which is basically a project. We're going to deliver this playbooks mechanism into the DevBox CLI. And this will allow developers to write their own playbooks and execute them as they want with their own arguments. So basically, they just author them and they are available within the DevBox CLI for them to execute. It could be to create data, destroy data, configure something, I don't know, whatever comes to their mind. There's a lot of use cases that they've already came up with, and we want to enable them to be faster. That's basically it. We're going to fully revamp our CI/CD system as well throughout this year, and make it better than it is at the moment. And just continue work on this remote development environment to be faster than it already is, and better for developers. That's it at the moment.
Yeah, I think one of the goals is also like removing all the waste that slows down our developers, and making our tooling very streamlined, and that would allow our developers to focus on development instead of fighting the environments. So that's the thing we are currently working on.
So if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you and talk more about how you've sort of built this up and where you might be heading with this to maybe see how they could do it in their organization, what's the best way to contact you? Diogo, we'll start with you.
Well, the best way we're actually going to write a blog post about everything that we've built internally and how developers work in our engineering blog post. And there are plenty of ways that we can be contacted. For example, Ragnar is participating in DevSpace Discord channel or Slack. I'm not sure where it is. And we can actually make available emails that you guys can share for people to contact us directly. And we're more than happy to talk with whoever wants to talk with us about the thing that we've built.
Yep. And we'll have all of both Ragnar's and Diogo's contact information down in the show notes. Guys, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.